here to do the devil's work.
The 1990s, a lot of people say this is a bad decade for horror, but I strongly disagree. Listen, every decade has a bunch of crap in it, all right? The 90s included, I'm not going to deny that. But the gold here in the 90s is really good gold. I'm going through and giving you guys my top 10 favorite horror movies of every decade, starting at the 1970s, and I'm going to go up through the 2010s for this 2024 month of October to give you guys some Halloween-themed videos. We have arrived at the 1990s, and just to reiterate, this is just my personal list, my personal preferences. This is not meant to be objective whatsoever, and that will be abundantly clear when I get to my number one, because nobody's going to agree with me. It's very, very, very much a personalized list. But regardless, give your top 10, your top 5, or whatever you guys want in the comments below. Let me know your favorite horror movies of the 1990s. Once again, this is just about favorites, and it's not about objectivity in any way. But let's get started with a few honorable mentions, because I really kind of wanted to put Halloween H2O in my top 10, but I figured I would leave it off in order to give a little bit more variety to the top 10 instead of just going through, numerous slasher sequels. But I really like Halloween H2O, and it's a little bit debated in the fan base, but I think Halloween H2O did the whole Laurie Strode kind of overcoming her past and trauma stuff better than the 2018 version. And I know it has a lot of the kind of cliche, cheesy things that were going on at the 90s at the time, but overall, I do think it's a really good movie. I think the performances are really strong. Yes, the Michael Myers mask, but it's not the first time the mask has been fucked up. I mean, we lived through part 4, we can live through H2O. I like the movie a lot. Obviously, as an Evil Dead fan, I have to honorable mention Army of Darkness. Not my favorite Evil Dead movie. It's definitely an acquired taste, but when I'm in the mood for it, it's absolutely perfect. I have to give a shout out to the sci-fi horror of Event Horizon. Once again, Sam Neill being a Scream King. He will show up again on my actual list. Shout out to Candyman. Not a huge fan of the overall film. I do like it. Not one of my favorites, but Tony Todd as Candyman in the film, I love his performance, dude. He scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. So I gotta mention Candyman. Gotta mention cheesy movies like Tremors, really great. The It TV movie with Tim Curry. The Japanese movie Audition, although the horror doesn't really happen until like the last 20 minutes, but it is extremely horrific. If you want to count anime, put Perfect Blue on that list as well. This one I left off the list. This would be on the list, but I could understand this not counting. It's The Mummy from 1999. I mean, technically, it is a remake of a horror film, and horror things are happening. I mean, it has a goddamn mummy, and people are dying, but yeah, it's definitely more of an action-adventure film than it is a horror movie, so it'll just be in my honorable mention. As well as these two movies that are pretty critically acclaimed, which would be Silence of the Lambs and Misery. You could argue that those are thrillers or not horror, depending on how you want to count, wherever you put the cutoff of horror. But they're both extremely excellent movies, incredibly well made, tons of suspense, tons of terror throughout them. I actually think Misery is a little bit more frightening than Silence of the Lambs, just like picturing yourself in that scenario. Like, I love movies that kind of put you in an isolated location and you can't escape, and it's like, what would you do? And Kathy Bates is just out of her goddamn mind. So all of those are honorable mentions and great movies of the 90s, but here are my top 10 personal favorite. At my number 10, I know some people are probably going to roll their eyes at this, but I'm going to put Sleepy Hollow, the 1999 movie by Tim Burton. This is really the only straight up full 100% horror movie that Tim Burton has ever made, which I think is a goddamn shame. And part of the reason I'm putting it on the list is just because of the atmosphere that this movie gives off. This movie is just caked in the perfect Halloween fall feeling. Like, every single shot of this movie is just an old, creepy, decrepit town, cemeteries, fog, the dead trees, and of course, just the insanity of the levels of gore that's in this movie. It's very over the top, but it's definitely the goriest Tim Burton movie. The imagery of the Headless Horseman, it's got witches in it. Like, everything in this movie is just encompassing the entire fall Halloween season, and it's just one of those perfect Halloween movies for me, and I go back to it and watch it a lot. I think it's really underrated, honestly. My number 9 is going to be a movie called Cemetery Man. I've talked about this movie a couple of times on the channel, but I have to really reinstate how much you guys should watch this movie. I believe it's on Amazon Prime right now. Just go watch it because it is one of the most bonkers, fucking out of this world movies that I've ever seen, and I love it so much. I don't even know how to describe this movie. It's extremely difficult because it has multiple different plot threads going on at the same time. There's not much of an overall story. It's based on the comic book Dylan Dog. It's about a man who works in a cemetery, but every time somebody dies and gets buried within the cemetery, they rise up as a zombie the next night, so he has to kill them. But it's not really a zombie movie. That's just kind of his job, right? And he falls in love with a beautiful woman who's turned on by Crips, and she's also got a fear of penises. It's a thing. There's zombies, there's biker gangs, the Grim Reaper shows up at one point, and then there's just a insane murder spree that happens in the final act that kind of comes out of nowhere but is also wonderful in its own way. He's constantly breaking down psychologically. You don't know what's real, what's not real, but it is definitely one of those movies that is going to give you a unique flavor that most movies don't give you. You know, it doesn't really follow the traditional 3-act structure. It really just goes off the wall and does whatever it wants to, and that's what I really appreciate about this movie. At my number 8 spot, I was gonna try to avoid sequels on this list, but I gotta put this on here. I just have to. I'm putting Child's Play 2. Came out in 1990, so it absolutely counts, and when I was doing my Child's Play Chucky retrospective earlier in the year, you know, I had always thought that the original Child's Play was my favorite, and I do really love that movie. I think it's a fantastic horror movie in its own right. But after rewatching all of them in a row, I gotta say, Child's Play 2 is superior, and I think the main reason is because you get so much more Chucky and his personality, and this is where he starts to really kind of develop the Chucky personality a lot more than the first one. A lot of the first one is kind of the mystery, well, not really mystery, but Chucky is incognito for the first half of the film. You know, he's playing the act of the doll. But in Child's Play 2, as soon as he gets resurrected in the beginning, he's just Chucky in full force. So you get a lot more personality, a lot more kills, a lot more of Brad Dourif kind of really getting into the flavor of what Chucky is. You have Andy and Kyle, who work very well as a duo fighting back against Chucky because now, you know, Andy is aware of what Chucky is, so he's fighting back the entire time. And of course, you get the iconic final sequence in the toy factory, which is a moment that will live in my mind forever. I saw like that toy factory ending when I was way too young, and it freaked the hell out of me. And it's just something that I think out of all of the Child's Play Chucky movies, nothing is as memorable as that final sequence in the toy factory where his hand gets chopped off and he shoves the knife blade on his hand. He's freaking out. I'm fucking trapped in here! Like, I love it. I love it so much. Child's Play 2. At my number 7, I'm going to put the Francis Ford Coppola Dracula movie here. I'm a sucker for any good Dracula story, and I think that this is one of the best of the bunch. You could put this right up there with the original Bela Lugosi. You could put it up there with Nosferatu. You could put it up there with Christopher Lee. I think that this Dracula movie is awesome. Now, of course, once again, I saw this at a very early age, and it had a significant impact on me, and I'm not denying that my list is full of my personal experiences and nostalgia, but this movie is so captivating to me. I remember the first time that I saw it when I was a little kid, I was just mesmerized by the visuals. And every single sequence of this movie, whether it's the first sequence of Keanu Reeves going to the castle, him with the 3 wives that I've pictured myself in that scenario many times, or whether or not it's Dracula turning into the wolf or turning into the giant bat, or even the flashback sequences where he's in that iconic red armor. And I swear to God, I had an action figure of that red armor Dracula. I don't know where it went, but I could have sworn that I had one. I think for the most part, this is about as good of a big budget, special effects heavy Dracula movie as you could get. I mean, is there some cheesy acting in it? Sure, yeah, but like, it was never enough to bother me. I think that Winona Ryder is great in it. Gary Oldman is great as Dracula. And even if you don't like how it deviates from the novel at times, I think you could still appreciate just how much effort and energy and passion went into making it. Like, you can tell that everybody, from the actors to the costume designs to the set designs, like, everybody was trying to make this as big of a spectacle as they could. They were trying to make the ultimate Dracula movie, and I think a lot of it pays off. My number 6 pick, Scream King Sam Neill, is here once again. I'm going with In the Mouth of Madness, John Carpenter's movie. One of the best John Carpenter movies. Doesn't quite hit the peaks of like The Thing or Halloween, but it's right there underneath it. It is a fantastic standalone horror movie, and I don't think people talk about it enough. I really, really enjoy it. Basically, the premise is Sam Neill plays this investigator that is looking for this horror author, which is kind of like a fictional Stephen King type character that has gone missing, and ends up in this town where it seems like all of these different events from his various horror novels are real and are all happening at the same time. It's one of those movies that's going to make you question, you know, what's real and what's not real, but it's also an avenue to show all of these different types of horror things all at once, as opposed to just picking like one horror story. You have multiple to go with, so there's all these weird things going on at the same time. It gets very existential, supernatural, apocalyptic at times, and then it's all pulled together by Sam Neill's performance that has to respond and react to all these strange things that are happening around him, and you really buy into his sort of like descent into insanity as this is going on. Just a incredible fun ride of a horror movie that I don't feel like people talk about too much. It's hard to describe without spoiling a lot of stuff about it, but definitely one that I highly recommend if you have not seen it. And if you love John Carpenter, I think this is definitely one of his better ones. Now, as I get into the top half of my top 10, these ones become very biased and very personal, and people are going to hate my list from this point forward, I'm pretty sure. But my number 5 pick is going to be The Faculty. I know, listen, this movie is badass, man. This movie is great. Now, some people are going to say it's a sci-fi movie, not a horror movie. I'm sorry, but like when you have people's heads getting chopped off, when you have like weird tentacle creatures that are, you know, turning into giant monsters and attacking the kids, when you have weird worm things going into people's ears, when you have the T-1000 Robert Patrick himself shoving scissors through somebody's hands, I don't care. It's close enough for me. I'm calling it a horror movie, mostly because I just want to talk about it. This movie is endlessly entertaining for me, and I actually heard that they're releasing a 4K version of it pretty soon, so yeah, I'm gonna be buying that, and it's gonna be a glorious day. It takes all the cliche high school archetypes. You have the nerd, the goth girl, the druggie, the jock, and they all come together. Like, one of each category has to come together to fight against this alien invasion where aliens are taking over the body of people in town, starting with the high school staff. It's got Josh Hartnett in one of his first roles as one of the coolest characters of all time, Zeke. And there's an homage to The Thing, where they all have to do the drug to see if the aliens have taken over their bodies or not. I love the design of the creature at the end. Shockingly, this movie is directed by Robert Rodriguez, who has had a very strange career because he made like the Mexico trilogy with like Desperado, Once Upon a Time in Mexico. He made Sin City, and he also made all the Spy Kid movies. So go figure. And he also made The Faculty. Very interesting career. But I think his style and his energy definitely comes through in the film. You got Elijah Wood in there. I mean, just like, I love The Faculty. I don't care. This movie is fun to me. A lot of these top 5 for me are just movies that I find super entertaining, fun, and rewatchable. And that's just the way it is. My number 4 pick, I almost accidentally put this on my top 10 of the 80s because I could have sworn it was an 80s movie, but it's not. It's a 90s movie, so we got to talk about it again. This is Dead Alive, also known as Brain Dead. It is a Peter Jackson film, and I'll say it right now, Lord of the Rings is a great trilogy, but Peter Jackson's best movie is motherfucking Dead Alive. Because in no other movie do you get a kung fu fighting priest?
I kick ass for the Lord!
Do you get a zombie baby that you have to take for a walk and then beat the shit out of? And this is also one of the goriest, over-the-top movies I've ever seen. Wait, what is Dead Alive? If you guys don't know. Is it a zombie movie? I guess it is, technically. So, long before he made King Kong, this movie starts out at Skull Island, where an infected rat monkey is captured, bites some people, and they turn into, yeah, basically zombies. And the main character has to deal with this situation as it just progressively gets worse and worse. The final sequence of this movie, where all hell is breaking loose inside this house mansion, it is just like, I cannot even begin to describe it to you. It probably is the goriest movie I've ever seen. I don't know, Terrifier 3 comes out this weekend, maybe it'll beat it, but as of today, right now, I still think Dead Alive is the bloodiest movie ever made. Things are happening in this final sequence that are just incredible to witness. Like, people's guts are coming out, the guts are becoming sentient and attacking people, people's faces are getting ripped off. The main character uses a lawnmower as his primary weapon to fight the zombies, so blood is splattering everywhere. There's a giant kaiju-sized rat monster at the end of the film. I really cannot explain what was happening in this movie. I don't know what drugs Peter Jackson was taking, but I thank God he was taking them, because this movie is so incredible. I made the mistake once of showing this movie to a girl on a first date. I wouldn't recommend doing that, but in any other scenario, I would say please watch Dead Alive if you have not. My number 3 on my top 10 favorites, another Robert Rodriguez movie, From Dusk Till Dawn. I mean, come on. Come on. I have to put From Dusk Till Dawn on this list. Insanely rewatchable, super fun movie, written by Quentin Tarantino, starring Quentin Tarantino and George Clooney, and directed by Robert Rodriguez. This is a vampire movie, I guess. They call them vampires, but Jesus Christ, it's just a excuse to have whatever kind of crazy monsters and special effects by, you know, Greg Nicotero and Tom Savini. Tom Savini's in there with a cock gun. Basically, these two criminals have to get across the border to Mexico. They kidnap a family to hide in their RV to get across the border. Once they get there, they decide to go to a titty bar called the Titty Twister, where the entire bar is run by vampires that trap people inside the bar and rip them apart and eat them. And we have to fight against the vampires. Salma Hayek is in there looking as sexy as ever. Harvey Keitel. Cheech Marin plays 3 different roles in the film. It is just it is a spectacle to behold. It's such a fun movie. You got to turn your brain off a little bit, but my God. But I've seen this movie what feels like hundreds of times, and I'm going to watch it 100 times more. All right, my top 2. And yeah, here is where we get incredibly biased. Number 2 is going to be Scream. You might be surprised I haven't talked about Scream yet, since it is probably the most iconic film of the entire decade. And it definitely did change the game of horror. What can be said about Scream that hasn't already been said? I mean, it has what I think, honestly, I really do think that it has the best opening scene of any horror movie ever. It really does, especially if you didn't know what was going to happen. Like, now it's been made fun of and parodied and redone so many times, but at the time the film came out, like, people thought Drew Barrymore, her character, was a main character. Like, people did not expect her to die right then and there, and I love how the movie wastes no goddamn time. Like, there's no credits, there's nothing, there's just like the Dimension logo, the phone rings, Casey picks up the phone, hello? And it's just like, do you like scary movies? And it just fucking starts, and it goes as far as it possibly can, you know? Obviously, you know, Sidney Prescott, Dewey, all those characters, Gale, I mean, they're iconic in their own way. I love the Wes Craven era of Scream, you know, the most. The new ones were a decent revival. I don't think there's a single, like, horrendously bad movie in the entire franchise, but that original Scream movie just did something. It captivated people in the 90s. I wouldn't say as much because I wasn't born in the 70s, but I would say, like, around the same type of, like, universal fear as Jaws, in the sense of, like, people were afraid to go in the water. When Scream came out, everyone got caller ID and, you know, were afraid to answer the phone. It's just one of those movies, man. It also has the mystery element that I like a lot about it, because a lot of the other slashers, like, we know who they are, you know, but Scream, you know, it wasn't the first horror film to ever do this, but I think it was the first to kind of really be popular at it, of having a mystery, of trying to figure out who the killer is. So not only is it just a great slasher movie all the way through, but as you're watching it for the first time, you get to kind of like try to put the pieces together and figure out who the killer is. And that also makes it fun for rewatches, because once you find out who the killer is, you can go back and look at all the clues and be like, oh my God, it's so fucking obvious, you know? Anyway, Scream, number 2. And here is where everybody rolls their eyes. My number 1 pick, Wes Craven returns. Not with another Scream, but with New Nightmare. New Nightmare is my favorite horror film of the 90s. I don't care. I don't care what anybody says. I think New Nightmare is a goddamn underappreciated masterpiece. I think it's one of Wes Craven's best films, and I think that it maybe came out too soon. You know, it kind of led the charge for Scream to do this meta commentary on the horror genre, but I think New Nightmare, for me, just does it in a way that is absolute perfection. I would never say that New Nightmare is like objectively a better film than Scream, but for my personal favorites, absolutely. Because what you have to understand is that Wes Craven started, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger. It was his bread and butter to begin with that original film. The original film is a straight up, you know, perfect 10 out of 10 horror film. And as the sequels went on, you know, it got a little bit more mixed. You know, Freddy got a little bit more silly. He got insanely popular. Everybody knew who Freddy Krueger was. Everyone, you know, little kids were dressing up as Freddy Krueger. The fear was kind of gone, right? And New Nightmare was this really creative way to not really make a sequel, but to make a commentary on the whole phenomenon of Freddy Krueger, but still have it be a legitimate horror movie. Because New Nightmare takes place in the real world, where Nightmare on Elm Street is a movie series, and it stars Heather Langenkamp, who played Nancy in the original film, as herself. And in this version, there's like a demonic creature, or it takes on the shape and it takes on the attributes of what is in the collective consciousness of people at the time, as far as like monsters go, right? So there's like illusions that it was once like the witch from Hansel and Gretel, and it changed forms over time. So you have Robert Englund playing a version of Freddy, but it's not really Freddy Krueger. It's just this demonic creature that is taking on the form of Freddy Krueger. So it has different attributes, you know, it acts a little bit differently. It's recreating moments from the first film. I love movies that are about making movies, and, you know, this movie starts with them on set of a Nightmare on Elm Street film. And the fact that it's coming from Wes Craven, I think that that's what makes this movie so special to me, is that he was really kind of taking back his franchise, taking back his character, but not in like a traditional way. He was really taking a completely different approach to it, and I love what he did with it. I love that he brought Heather Langenkamp back to be the main character once again. I love all of the allusions to, like, you know, Nosferatu and stuff when they finally show this version of Freddy. It might not have as many kills in it. You know, it's not like a traditional slasher movie. A lot of the horror stuff is kind of sporadic, and most of it happens at the very end. But I just think that this movie is incredibly underrated. I love watching it. It's my favorite Nightmare on Elm Street besides the original. And I could watch those two back to back. If those were the only two Nightmare on Elm Street films I ever had, I mean, obviously that would suck to lose the other ones, but, you know, I think that would be just as good. You know, that would be fine just in itself, having those two. I know that New Nightmare is kind of controversial, and to put it at number 1 of the entire decade, I don't know if anybody else would, you know what I mean? But for me, it just holds a very special place in my heart, and I really, really love that film. So that's what it is. Anyways, guys, there you go. There's my top 10 favorite horror movies of the 1990s. Let me know what your top 10 is down below. I thank you guys for watching this video. We're going to do the 2000s and the 2010s. Not going to do the 2020s because we're only about halfway through, so wouldn't really make sense to do it yet. But we're going to have 2 more decade top 10s for the month of October coming soon. So thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. Give the video a thumbs up and a comment to help it out in the algorithm. If you want to support the channel on a deeper level, I do have Patreon, channel memberships, merch store, all that linked down below. Other than that, guys, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll talk to you next time.